Greg, when I personally think about civics education and what brought me to this moment, I'm really thinking about my grandma Sarah, who's 91. And, I remember vividly her convening community town halls right in our living room. And if you grew up in the Black church, you know that you made it when you can have a meeting in your living room and the couch is covered with plastic. And she would have Councilman White at the time, Commander McGrath, who was the police commander of our police district during that time in the early 1990s, and other activists and members of the clergy really talking about how to make our block safe on 121st and Dove, safe for her grandbaby so they could go out and run in the yard, play basketball on the street corner. And she did everything she could day in and day out to make sure that her grandbabies had a safe place to live. And it was those early moments of how to truly bring people together that I learned from my grandma, Sarah. And that was really my first education in civics. But I would also say I come from a long line of truly public servants. My dad was actually one of the first African-American cops and firefighters in Cleveland Heights. And he taught me early on the importance of public service, giving back, leading with empathy. And my mom, who is a graduate of John Adams High School, is a social worker. And throughout her life, as she struggled day in, day out to get her associate's degree at Tri-C and get her bachelor's at Ursuline, she started to understand the importance of being an engaged citizen. Because, at the time, as a social worker, she got really passionate about social work, fighting for HIV and AIDS victims across our entire community. And she wanted to make sure that they had a voice in the State House and a voice in Washington. And so seeing my mom show up to protest as a college student and going to some of the protests with her really exposed me early on at the importance of not only learning about these things in the classroom, but also, learning the importance of being an active participant in democracy. And, there's a quote that I always like to talk about and bring up when I'm talking about civics, education, and democracy, that democracy is not a spectator sport. You can't expect to see any change if you don't vote, if you don't protest, if you don't show up to that city council meeting or school board meeting. And so we all have a role to play to make our community better. And so when I think about what got me to this moment, I would say it was a lot of love and a village that really showed me early on the importance of servant leadership and the importance of giving back, because to whom much is given, much is required. And that sense of sacrifice has really been my North Star since I was growing up in Mount Pleasant to the campaign I am leading now to be the next mayor of Cleveland.
That's fantastic. I mean, did you find so what high school did you graduate from, and did you find yourself?
So I went to Trinity High School.
Where?
I went to Trinity High School.
Trinity.
In Garfield Heights. I would catch that 48A bus on RTA to Marymount Hospital and go to Trinity. And my mom still tells a story. I actually was so naive that I turned down a scholarship to go to Ignatius because my whole dream was to play Division I basketball at Duke. And I thought at the time I had an easier shot making the varsity squad at Trinity. And so I go to Trinity and my mom and my dad are paying all this money for private coaching and instructors. And then I tear my meniscus my sophomore year going up for a rebound. And I have a vivid conversation with my mom. She closes the door in the car. And because we're amongst teachers, I'm going to make sure I give the PG version of this conversation. But she says, Justin, you ain't the next LeBron James. You got to find something else out to do. Because at the time, I had like a 2.4, 2.5 GPA, and all I cared about was sports. And she says, you're kind of good at public speaking because, I grew up in the church and I would do the Easter speeches every year. And I was a leader in Vacation Bible School. And she says, why don't you try out for mock trial? I'm like, okay, right? And so I try out for mock trial and I'm just so geeked for the interview. I'm so hyped up, and I just bomb the tryout, bomb it completely, and I'm like deflated. And so I walk down the steps to my locker, and I see a kid, and he has a Wes Clark for President t-shirt on. And at the time, my mom and I started to watch The West Wing, and I'm like, this sounds interesting. What's all that about? So I volunteered in the Wes Clark campaign. Obviously, he did not become the nominee for president. John Kerry did. And then I got plugged into the local Democratic Party as a junior in high school, working on the Kerry campaign for president. And that was really my start as in my own right, being a leader and trying to really understand democracy and elections and politics and how to make a difference.
That's interesting. And so, and I know that you've been connected nationally.
Yeah.
And so that makes me wonder, like, so when you first got engaged, was that where your brain was thinking about like really big picture? Were you doing much in sort of the community, or were you were thinking elsewhere?
A little bit of both, because I was fortunate enough to get accepted to look up to Cleveland as a junior in high school. And it really exposed me as a kid growing up on the Southeast side. You know, I had never met really kids from Hawken or US or Ignatius or Fairview Park or Rocky River. I had never been to the West Side Market till I was a junior in high school. I'd never really been to the art museum, you know, and so it really just exposed me to Cleveland. And if you know anything about Look Up to Cleveland, they give you this action project where as a junior in high school, everyone has to come up with their own civic vision for the city over the next 30 plus years. And at the time, I met Peter Lawson Jones, who was a county commissioner, Harvard Law grad, and he was the only one of the only Black politicians I met in Cleveland who actually would allow me in his office. And so I shadowed Peter, and then I started to do some work locally in Cleveland and during high school. And so I had my eye on DC, what was going on nationally, but I was also starting to get plugged in locally as well.
That's fantastic. And a big shout out to the Cleveland Leadership Center for their Look Up to Cleveland, because they do not only during an academic year, but they also do a summer version, and it's fantastic. But I, love hearing, how your experience with kids from other communities helped to open your eyes up to, a wider, greater Cleveland. So I think that's fantastic. So in terms of like staying on this sort of subject of civic engagement, especially of young people, your candidacy has expressed a sense of urgency. You started the organization Cleveland Can't Wait. And I would just love to get your sense about what, in your experience, is the key to engaging young people in issues of community. It doesn't just have to be in their local community. It really is just about being engaged. Could be about national issues and national policies. So I'm just wondering, in your experience, what do you think is key for engaging young people in this way?
Greg, I would say this, and I'm learning this this lesson so much as a candidate for public office now. Power and politics and change, in my opinion, is all about proximity. So what do I mean by that? When we as candidates for elected office, or as politicians that are in elected office, when we forget that proximity of our why and why we're running, I think we lose our ability to engage people and engage the residents we're trying to serve in a way that meets them where they are. And I think that is the missing link we have right now in our body politics, not only locally, but nationally as well. We've lost that connectivity and the connectedness. And I think, we have to do everything we can to improve our democracy, and by enhancing our proximity to people and being authentic and engaging in their pain and their hopes and their struggles and their dreams as well. I think that's how you tap into that voter engagement. And unfortunately in Cleveland, we've had so many instances where the will of the people has been rejected. You think about what happened several years ago when voters mobilized to get a $15 minimum wage on the ballot. And regardless how you feel about the economic merits of a $15 minimum wage, when voters mobilize and do everything the right way by the law, and their vote is suppressed, then of course they're not going to show up and vote in an election. When you think about what happened with the Quicken Loans deal, and regardless how you feel about the Quicken Loans deal, the fact that voters mobilized and their vote was suppressed, of course they give up. And you think about, for over 90 years, we've had a city where if I wanted to show up to a city council meeting, or if Grandma Sarah wanted to show up to a city council meeting and talk about the vacant land that continues to sit next to my childhood home that we can't do anything about because we can't get a response from the city, she can't go to public comment and talk about that because we don't have public comment in city council meetings. And so when we remove that proximity from our body politics, then it undermines our ability to keep people engaged in the political process. And one of the things I'm really excited about what we're doing with our campaign is we're starting to mobilize high school students and college students from the entire region that have built up their own group called Students for Bibb. And they're talking about the importance of local politics and local elections. And I was talking to a group of high school freshmen and sophomores yesterday, and many of them did not live in the city of Cleveland. But when we talked about the importance of the region and how the city is vital to a thriving region, it started to connect for them. Because what we need to do as leaders in this community, regardless if you're an elected office or not, we have to make Cleveland that place where people have pride to come back to, versus a place where you leave and you never come back.
Well, I appreciate too your reference to high school kids and engaging them. For our last student challenge, we did one on how the big challenge was how can you raise your voice in the political sphere? So I hear you saying that so often so many voices are actively dismissed or squelched. And we found that over the course of one academic year, working with kids on helping them have a voice, helping them with public speaking, helping them analyze resources and discussing with one another, that was key to helping them feel like they have some confidence to engage in the issues. And so I appreciate, the idea that you also were having these conversations, which, by the way, this is a shout out to everybody who oftentimes, when Teaching Cleveland invites individuals, really dynamic individuals, we're so heartened by how many people will respond. Because just your very presence of you, like you said, you were talking to freshmen and sophomores yesterday, your very presence has a major impact, because kids will go back home and be like, oh my God, I met this Justin Bibb guy, he's young, he's running for mayor. And that alone communicates that their ideas matter because people show up, and what an important sort of role that is. So I'm fascinated that, for you, in your experience, you've seen people and their civic activism sort of dismissed or actively squelched, which is what you're saying sort of propelled you to this moment.
And Greg, I would also say we all have to figure out how we prioritize democracy building beyond just an election cycle. You think about the importance of getting our community ready now for the next census. You think about how we give our parents more agency and political power to advocate for better public education, right? Because having parents with that power and agency only makes our public school system better. And as mayor, I want that. I want that accountability. I want that pressure. And so I think it's really talking about the importance of democracy building as a key lever for a thriving city. And it's not just about electoral politics, but it's about how do you have, basic quality city services day in and day out, and a city that works for everyone. And that requires an actively engaged citizenry throughout our entire community.
I appreciate that. And I think too, one of my questions that I realize you're not an educator. However, it's clear you respect the role of educators and the ways they can engage kids. So I wonder what sort of thoughts you have about ways that educators can engage their kids. Have you had experiences, it could be your personal experiences or other experiences that you've seen with other educators. So I'm just sort of curious about how you see, sort of what the mayor of Cleveland can do in terms of engaging teachers to get kids engaged.
I would say one of the things that we cannot forget and we cannot dismiss in this community is the special responsibility and unique and privilege the mayor of the city has in controlling our local public school district. And that gives us, I believe, truly a unique opportunity to create a world-class, thriving, innovative, equitable school system that can really work for everyone. And, we've seen great, models across the country and some really good models locally in Cleveland of high quality education. And I think the key question before us is how do we scale some of these best practices to create a more equitable school system long term? I would say for me, what I've learned through my own life in education is the importance of individualized learning. And, you've seen the importance of that right now during COVID-19. And as mayor, I would do everything in my power to really enhance personalized learning for every kid. So every kid has a clear learning path that's tied to a subject or an activity that keeps them engaged in the classroom. Because the data tells us that high quality teachers and also the quality and the rigor of that curriculum are the two biggest levers we can control to close the achievement gap. And on that other lever, I really think it's important that we do everything we can, particularly in Cleveland, to recruit more teachers of color inside CMSD. Studies have shown that when a kid who looks like me shows up to the classroom and has a teacher who shares that lived experience, it's going to go a long way. And I think that needs to be a major priority for us moving forward. I would also say we need to expand our definition of education and learning, because it doesn't stop when you leave the school building. What kept me alive growing up on Dove is the fact that my mom made sure that I was busy from sun up to sundown, right? When I left school, I was in computer or science club. I was singing in the church choir. I was playing basketball. I was working in the summer garden during the summertime. I was just busy all the time. And so having a community that makes sure that not only do we have high quality schools, a high quality school in every zip code across the city, but also high quality out of school time programs that really support the whole needs of our children would really go a long way to make sure that all of our kids are ready for college, work, and life in the 21st century.
Yeah, I appreciate that. By the way, let me just pause to say that as Justin is speaking and as you're listening to my questions as well, feel free to pop some questions in the chat that we will certainly get to. So I'm sure many thoughts are rattling around in your brains. And I appreciate a couple things. One, we had Randy McShepard, I don't know, a month or two ago. Remember, time is law. I don't know, whatever. It was some time ago.
Randy's a tough act to follow, man. So I'm glad I made the cut.
And it was great because he just talked about, the needs for sort of reinvigorated civics education, especially for the pipeline of African-American talent and educational opportunities and engagement. So in many ways, speaking the same language that Randy was echoing whenever it was a month or two ago. But so I appreciate that. In my other role, and along with Aaron Miller Tate, we work at University Circle Incorporated, and our one of the roles that we play is trying to do exactly that, which is to increase out of school time experiences that supplement and support and connect, especially kids in the adjacent neighborhoods around University Circle, with educational experiences that in many ways get you beyond the state standards and can really connect kids. And in many ways, what we do in Teaching Cleveland is very similar to UCI, which is it's about creating a love of place and an appreciation of community, and also building a sense of efficacy for especially our kids, especially starting in middle school. that their opinions matter, that what they do matters, that the community that they surround themselves with also matters, and that then makes a bigger impact on our neighborhoods and our greater Cleveland community. So I appreciate that very much. So we've talked about, the sort of urgency that you've expressed, especially as it relates to challenges and opportunities. And a side note is, when we first started teaching in Cleveland, many of the teachers would say, when I ask my kids whether or not they want to stay around in Northeast Ohio, like, no, get me out of here. They wanted to go. And we always had to remind people that our organization was not just boosterism. It wasn't like, hey, just love Cleveland. It was, let's appreciate the history of Cleveland, its complications, its challenges, but let's also then engage you in ways to get you to think about ways that you can be the part of the solution and think about other opportunities. So in that same sort of spirit, if I could ask you, what to you stands out as perhaps one of or two of the most important challenges that we face as a community? And then what do you think are one or two of the most important opportunities that you see going forward?
I think our biggest challenge is our sense of complacency as a community. It's a systemic cultural problem that I think undermines our ability to truly live up to our potential as a city. You think about the major headwinds we face, the poorest big city in America, 50% of our kids are living in poverty, the least connected in terms of the digital divide. And yet we still don't have the outcry and the level of urgency that we need to truly tackle some of these structural issues in a systemic way. And so until we fix that cultural issue, and I don't believe it's just an indictment in government, I think it's an indictment in every sector in this community. And we all have a responsibility to do everything we can to change that culture. In terms of opportunity, I would say, given all that we're seeing right now in the economy and the changing nature of the economy, I believe mid-sized cities like Cleveland are uniquely positioned to lead America's economic recovery for a post-COVID-19 world. You're seeing all the data where the quote-unquote Zoom workers are now going to cities that have high-quality basic city services, affordable housing, high-quality parks, high-quality public education. And 10, 15, 20 years ago, you would move to a New York or Silicon Valley because you had to be there, right, for the job. Now the job is going to follow you. And so if a community like Cleveland can truly, leverage some of the, key ingredients we have in our community, I think we can be one of the best mid-sized cities in America. But until we tackle our lack of complacency, our sense of complacency, then I don't believe we're going to be able to achieve our true potential long-term.
Interesting. I appreciate that. So we had a question in the chat from Gigi Elder. What ideas do you have to combat the poverty, violence, and racism in Cleveland?
Well, it is clear that poverty is a major systemic structural issue. And I think it's important to note at the onset that government cannot solve this problem alone, but government can play a large role in changing some of the structural systems that keep people in poverty. So a couple things. Number one, our criminal justice system, ending cash bail and finally having a criminal justice system that works for everyone and putting the true, equity back into criminal justice, I think can go a long way in ending cash bail and decriminalizing, non-violent basic violations like jaywalking. I think will go a long way to keep people out of our criminal justice system that don't deserve to be in there. I would also say education is fundamental. I know for me that having access to a high quality education truly was my pathway out of poverty for my family. And so doing everything we can to have a world-class public school district that teaches our kids the skills they need to compete will truly help, I think, close some of the racial wealth gaps that we have in our community. I would also say, having a city that finally is going to invest in supporting small businesses, particularly small businesses of color in our city. There was a recent study in the county that showed that less than 0.5% of all county money was spent to support small businesses of color in our city. That's less than $700,000 spent. Less than $700,000 was spent. And you think about what businesses had the hardest hit after COVID-19, there were minority-owned businesses. And so with the $541 million we're getting from the Biden administration, I believe as mayor, we can start to close some of these systemic structural issues that undermine our ability for everyone in our city, particularly in communities of color, to succeed by providing that early stage capital and investment to support our minority-owned small businesses to compete in the global marketplace.
I appreciate that. You know, you mentioned in terms of education, and you know, there is a skills issue, right, and the state standards, and then there is also rethinking education. You mentioned being, you know, as individualized as possible, you know, for our students, and in many ways, you know, you see even just through this virtual world that we have maybe some other opportunities that we hadn't maybe thought about, and CMSD worked so hard to get, you know, devices into the hands of every child very, very quickly. Paint a picture in 10 years of what our education system could look like, CMSD specifically, perhaps, or maybe county.
In a Bibb administration, I think Cleveland will be at the cutting edge of what public education should look like in America. There are a few ideas we have in order to accelerate the pace of change right now inside of CMSD. I think first and foremost, we need to be very clear on doing everything we can to close low-performing schools that aren't helping our parents and our kids succeed, and open up new schools in every neighborhood that truly bring parents, students, and key neighborhood stakeholders together to make sure that those neighborhood-based schools are working for our families and students. And I think that needs to be a key priority. I would also say, secondly, we got to stop teaching to the test. And I think most teachers on this call would agree with that sentiment. And one of the things that gets me excited about what we're learning in this moment right now with COVID-19 is the importance of teaching our kids job readiness skills right now, not while they're just in high school, but even in middle school. And you know, one thing we want to do as mayor is to have year-round apprenticeship programs for every junior and senior in high school, and start to socialize with students the importance of what kind of career do they want. Do you want to be a doctor? Do you want to be a firefighter? Do you want to be a social worker? Having those conversations in middle school, and then building in year-round apprenticeship programs junior, and senior year. So you're graduating not just with a high school diploma, but you're graduating with 1 or 2 additional credentials, and you are job ready on day 1 when you graduate from high school. And I think it's important to continue to invest in having a college-going culture, but I want to make sure that we also invest with parity, having a job readiness culture for our kids inside CMST. And I think that's the missing link. And I think we have to change that narrative that everyone's got to go to college. You know, I think it's about how do we equip kids with the skills they need to compete in a global marketplace, to diversify our marketplace, to give these kids the wages they need so they can give their families a shot at achieving their own dreams and destiny.
I like that, a job readiness culture. You know, that's really interesting.
Yep.
So Joe Labazzo, one of our longtime teaching Cleveland educators, who actually did a learning lab with us just before the pandemic, because in Lakewood High School, he was able to really facilitate a conversation between Lakewood High School students and Lakewood police, and there had been a lot of tension. So Joe actually led a Teaching Cleveland Learning Lab on ways to reduce some of that tension between young people and Lakewood police. So thank you, Joe, for that. But his question to you, and it sort of pairs with another question about gun violence. So Diane asked how you feel about gun violence, and Joe said, how do you feel about the Cleveland Police Department and how it's done in relation to the consent decree? And the other follow-up was, what have they done well in eliminating some of the issues the DOJ laid out, and what issues do you think they still need to work on the most?
Well, it's a shame because the culture is still broken inside the police department, even after the consent decree 7 years later, after the tragic murder of Tamir Rice. The culture is broken when you still have cops continue to use racist language as they talk about residents of our community. And the culture of accountability needs to start at the top with the mayor. And, you know, as mayor, I'm going to do everything I can to change that culture. And I think it starts by truly having, number one, an independent civilian review oversight board that has real accountability and real teeth to root out bad cops, to hold bad cops accountable, and to make sure that the culture and the training meets the right standard so that our residents, regardless if you're in Mount Pleasant or West Park, that your rights are protected day in and day out. That's first and foremost. I'd say secondly, it's past time that we have an alternative model of policing that you're starting to see in cities like Columbus and New York as well, where you have mental health professionals and social workers joining officers and first responders on nonviolent dispatch calls. Because when you call the Cleveland Police Department right now, you get three options: fire, police, and EMS. That's not good enough. We need a mental health option as the fourth option. And I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that we have robust training and robust and a robust allocation of patrols in all 5 police districts that have this alternative model of policing to make sure we are truly addressing the root causes of crime. The other thing I would say on this point is this: we've had a lot of fancy press releases and headlines about racism as a public health crisis, and we're going to create a new office to do this inside City Hall around youth violence prevention. But we haven't heard any real success of any of these programs have worked. And I think it's past time that we focused on not just fancy programs, but execution and being transparent about what programs are working and what programs aren't working. And if they aren't working, they shouldn't get any more funding. And if they are working, right, invest in what works. I was just touring the King Kennedy projects where a young man named Arthur was shot and killed by a CMHA police officer. And it took the city over 3 months to release that autopsy report. That's a shame. And my heart continues to cry out to that family. Nobody deserves that kind of justice, no one. And so we need to do everything we can to make sure our residents get the justice, the accountability, and the transparency they deserve. And as mayor, the buck's going to stop with me to have that culture inside of our police department.
And so along those lines, how do you feel? So, you know, in terms of the DOJ consent decree, and, you know, it's clear you feel like there's still a cultural problem.
Yeah.
Do you see any gains? Do you see any improvements?
Well, the gains are there's a blueprint for reform, right? Which is obviously a positive step in the right direction, Greg. But a blueprint's only a blueprint if you don't execute. So we know that the consent decree is going to be up in 2023. And if I'm mayor, if I don't see the real change we need there past the consent decree, I'm going to keep the fire underneath my administration and my chief of police to make sure that we continue the hard work of systemic change and systemic reform. And I believe the best answer to that is truly having an independent civilian review oversight board where residents, activists, the legal community, and law enforcement are all at the table, right, as a collective community, because this isn't about, undermining the police. This is about allowing the good cops, folks like my dad, who want to come in and just do their job better every single day. And that's the kind of culture I want to create as mayor.
So you're getting a lot of kudos here in the chat and talking about, especially raising the issue of mental health support for individuals who are caught up in the criminal justice system, and of course eliminating some funding for programs that don't appear to be working, and making sure that there are measures for success that are being monitored regularly and benchmarks.
Because we owe that to the taxpayers, right? And if I showed up to my job and I was getting paid every 2 weeks and I couldn't show any success, I wouldn't have a job anymore, right? And so as mayor, I want to make sure that, as a city, we have performance metrics to measure how we're doing. But even at the neighborhood level, we should have some performance metrics to measure how we're doing. And I know that metrics aren't everything, right? I'm not naive to that, but I think some level of accountability matters, especially given the enormity of the challenges that we see in our community right now.
Sure, which I think is so important. And Bruce Ransom, by the way, mentioned in the chat about the Metropolitan Alliance of Black School Educators in an initiative called Blackmail Teach, and they have a meeting actually tomorrow at 7 o'clock.
Hey, Bruce, I would love to come to a meeting if we can get that on the schedule at some point. That'd be great.
Very cool.
I don't know if I can make it tomorrow, but let's get that on the books, man.
Okay, April 1st is the general meeting.
Okay.
And April 8th is the Blackmail Teach meeting, and I will work through Greg to get you the invite. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that, man.
Happy to be
anyone
the
else on the call.
go-between.
Great.
Yeah, happy to be the go-between, Bruce. So I appreciate that. Some other questions. This is just sort of the open, Q&A here for Justin, after having talked a lot about his connection with, engagement. Yep.
Hey, Greg, can we have folks who want to ask their question, ask the question so I can chat with them? How's that sound?
Absolutely.
Give you a little break. I love to meet some people and hear some names. It's hard in a virtual environment when you're campaigning. So.
Don't be shy teaching Cleveland peeps.
Yeah, come on, guys. You guys are teaching.
Come on.
Yes.
All right. Go ahead.
Okay. My name is Diane Howard.
Hey, Diane. I called you yesterday.
Oh, wow. Well, I am a community leader and a community activist for Lakeview Terrace, CMHA. And I be busy a lot. And also I'm with the organization called In Poverty Now. And Noble, Larry Bresler, is our organizer, Organize Ohio. And we'd be glad to have you sit in some of our Zoom meetings. I
would love to come.
All right, I'll let you know.
Okay.
Just call me back and leave a message again.
Okay.
And I will be back to you soon.
Okay.
And I'd be so proud to walk with you, to get the residents to vote for you. We need, and I'm cut it short, I'm a long speaker. We need more young men to get out and stand up like you and become a mayor. And we have a fresh start, I would think. And thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Diane. Anytime. Appreciate that so much.
Hi, Justin. My name is Debbie Berry. I work for University Circle with Greg and Aaron on the real estate side. And so I have a real estate question for you.
Yeah.
We have recently seen a couple of new residential housing projects in Ohio and City and Tremont that have not been able to go forward because there's been strong pushback from community members, some of whom I think are just afraid of change. And I understand that there's been a lot of development in those neighborhoods. But I think that there needs to be some support from City Hall, because bringing new housing, bringing new residents to the city is obviously beneficial on every level. Mm-hmm. How would you recommend that we work with the city and the community to make sure that we're not stopping projects from going forward completely, but that we're getting to projects that fit the neighborhood, that work for the community? We have a couple projects here in University Circle too that quite honestly are getting a lot of pushback right now, and we're really trying to compromise and work with the council people, but we just haven't had a whole lot of comment from City Hall or support to kind of move forward. So I'm just wondering how you'd handle those kinds of things and what your thoughts are about development, again, especially in some of these neighborhoods that are seeing a lot of development already.
Debbie, that's a really good insight. I've gotten a lot of calls recently about this issue of, the enlarging power of city block clubs and their ability to kill certain projects.
Thank you. You said that better than I did.
Versus, making sure that we have development that reflects the nuances and the strengths and the needs of our respective communities. And so, Debbie, I would just say a couple of things. I think number one, this is where having an active and engaged mayor truly matters. A mayor who understands the importance of making sure that in almost every major development project, that there is a comprehensive neighborhood-based approach where we're not just paying lip service to community engagement, but that we operationalize it in the work that we do inside of City Hall. And so to address that, I think, structural issue, I intend to streamline everything from the Mayor's Office of Capital Planning to community and economic development, neighborhood development, to make sure that it's streamlined in a way to meet those nuances and to make sure that we're soliciting the right kind of input we need from not just community block clubs, but other key stakeholders in the community. Because I think that tension matters.
Sure.
And making sure as mayor, I'm setting that table with my administration, I think will go a long way to address some of those concerns that you're saying, that we're seeing in parts of the West Side specifically. Debbie, I would also say this, and I believe, Debbie, you would agree with this, but I would love your take on this down the line as the campaign continues. I'm becoming more a believer of this notion of what I call hyper-local economic development. So what do I mean by that? Well, we've seen a proliferation of housing abatements in our city, but they've been concentrated in a majority of the downtown and other trendy areas of the West Side, Ohio City, Tremont, Detroit, Shirley, et cetera, right? What you've seen in the West Side, when I'm talking to legacy homeowners that have been there for decades and decades before they were trendy neighborhoods, is that their housing values have gone up.
Going up, right.
And they can't afford the property tax, yet their neighbor has a 15-year tax abatement. And so how do we, put more scrutiny around where are we deploying tax abatements at the census tract level, right? So we can be thoughtful about that, but also providing long-term property tax relief to those legacy homeowners so they can stay in their homes to prevent that displacement. And so I think that level of nuance is critical. And as mayor, I intend to make sure that we're scrutinizing where we're deploying what incentives to make sure we prevent that displacement and further exacerbate some of the inequities we see in terms of development across our community. I would also say this though, when I'm on the east side, they want more investment. And so it has to be a balancing act of, okay, so what tools do we need to deploy on the east side? Like a community land trust or zero interest loans for lease to purchase homes for more families on the east side so they can have access to wealth creation by home ownership. And so I think we need to have that kind of a hyper-local economic development approach to make sure that every neighborhood is a neighborhood of choice. And so this one-size-fits-all approach to how we deploy incentives has to stop. It has to. And we need to make sure that we have a thoughtful approach moving forward as a city. So sorry for the long answer, but I think it's important to talk to that nuance.
Thank you for saying that. I agree with you 100%. I think that there are different tools that are necessary in different areas because our city is not completely the same right now. And so we've got to accept that. But on the flip side, I think the process that developers need to go through needs to be more uniform. You can't change the rules in every neighborhood and expect people to understand a process and stick with it. So, and
not just for developers, but for homeowners too.
Yes.
I was talking to a homeowner in Ward 13. Michael, and he said he had to talk to almost 15 people to get a permit to make an update to his roof.
Yes, and again, he's trying to improve his house so that it stays long, it has longevity.
So he can stay in the community. So we're making it hard for folks like Michael to stay in Old Brooklyn when we should be, you know, doing everything we can to keep him in the
Make that
city,
happen, yeah.
not
Yeah.
go to Rocky River. We can't afford to lose Michael to Rocky River, right? And so we need to make sure that we have a unified, streamlining permitting process so that we can keep our, even the fact that when you go to the city's website right now, and you know, it's from the early 2000s.
If even, not earlier, right?
It's a shame.
Yeah.
So we have so much to do in order to make some of these basic things correct in our community. But thank you for your question, Debbie.
Thank you for that great answer.
We have time for maybe a couple more questions, if any questions are brewing.
Hey, Justin, I have a quick question, and I know I've talked to you once before, and
What's
I
your name,
appreciate.
man? I can't see. You.
Elliot Kamen.
Hey, Ellie. Yeah, I got your education ideas in the mail. Thanks for that, man. I really appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And I appreciate what you say about trying to eliminate or alleviate the pressure from state testing or just testing in general to allow for more creativity in the classroom and to address students' needs. Definitely think that's a great priority, but can you paint a picture for how you'll try to eliminate or alleviate state testing when it's controlled by state politics, which unfortunately don't consider or think about the students with high needs or our districts like Cleveland?
Yeah, Elliot, an important thing for us to consider, and I appreciate your comment about the importance of the state, because the state does control education policy for Cleveland. What you're seeing right now with State Representative Phil Robinson, he introduced a bill in the State House that would actually eliminate grades, and he wants to find new measures to measure whether or not students are progressing based on, I think, still 21st century standards, but relieving that pressure on grades and testing. You've seen many colleges start to eliminate the SAT and ACT requirement. So I believe as mayor, using the bully pulpit, working with our state legislature, our governor, and the superintendent of education across the state to really explore some alternative models. It's going to be up to me to set that table and to create a framework around that. And it's going to require a lot of partnerships with our state government in order to do that. But I think there are great models across the country where we've seen this get done. And the more I can use the bully pulpit in order to advance that reform, then that's what I'll do. But we have to try. We have to have the conversation. And I think that needs to be the first step. And, you know, as mayor, I want to create a culture where we become an office of yes, let's try, versus an office of no, we can't try because it hasn't been done before. And look at where that's gotten us, right? Everything basic to the fact that we don't have smart parking meters for the 2,100 parking meters we have across our city. When Chagrin Falls and Lakewood have parking meters that you can use a smartphone or a credit card to access, right? And so, you know, these are all things we have to start exploring and having hard conversations about to make sure we can get some real progress to move the city forward.
Great, thanks.
Yep. And keep the ideas coming, my man.
So looks like we have a comment in the chat from Lauren Mastracco. I'm a realtor and I find that it can be difficult for locals to find homes. Just like you were saying, I would love to see programming to support local citizens to purchase the homes in their neighborhoods. Currently working with a local woman who is working to purchase a home to live in and fix up, and she's continually beat out by investors. There's a significant barrier of entry in terms of home ownership. Thank you, Lauren.
Thanks, Lauren, for that.
Hey, Justin, this is Jen Forshee. I have a question for you. So I teach American government, and my students and I are, you know, we're constantly kind of discussing political polarization, which is, you know, for them, all they know, right? Like in their young lives. And I think as a young person, how would you respond to the question of how do we get past political polarization?
Jennifer, I would say the best thing I can do as a candidate is lead this campaign that we're building as an open tent campaign. I don't care if you're a Democrat or a Republican or an independent or a libertarian, but if you love Cleveland and you want to see new ideas, then I want you a part of this movement, because As mayor, no one cares what party I am when the potholes continue to be throughout our entire city. No one cares what party you are when people continue to be harassed by our police department. No one cares what party you are if you don't have a plan to figure out how we're going to spend $541 million of fiscal stimulus. And so, there's no Democratic way to create a job, no Republican way to fix a pothole. And I intend to work with anybody who loves this city as much as I do to move our community forward. And that's going to require me putting partisanship aside to work with the Governor DeWine, right, on education reform. It's going to require to put partisanship aside to work with our state legislature to make sure that we have a robust urban agenda in this state. And the fact that right now, the city of Cleveland is the only major city in this state that is not a part of the Ohio Mayor's Alliance that works aggressively to lobby our state government to invest in cities is a problem. And so it's all about, putting partisanship aside and doing everything I can to serve the residents of the city of Cleveland. And I think that's the best way to kind of solve some of the partisan gridlock we're seeing across the country. And I would also say, as mayors, we don't have the luxury of waiting on partisan politics. We just got to get the job done.
Well, thank you, Justin. We are, looks like there's a question here. So Pete Van Leer just joined. He said the question about the Cleveland plan is focused on improving education in the city within the limits imposed by a racist system, not only state funding, but also hardened boundaries that keep our children segregated in poorly resourced, neglected city. How would you, as mayor, advocate for a change to this system?
Well, we have to change how schools are funded statewide. We all know that it's unconstitutional. I know that there's a bill in the state house right now to address that. And then secondly, we can't fix it at the state. Then how do we find additional dollars at the local level to improve public education, to eradicate the racial segregation that we see across our city? And I think by making sure that we are as aggressive as we possibly can to get more teachers of color inside our classrooms and teaching our students, that will go a long way as well, to make sure we have as many leaders inside our education system that share the lived experiences of our scholars. That needs to be our priority.
I appreciate that. That actually, that relates very closely to what we try to do at Teach in Cleveland, which is to also encourage educators to become experts in various parts of their curriculum, of course, but specifically as it relates to Cleveland, so that as experts, teachers are sharing their insights and engaging kids in ways that we hope will be interesting, and will engage them in ways that will inspire them to want to stay connected in the conversation. So given the time that we're coming up upon 6 o'clock, I just wanted to make sure, okay, we're all good here, that we don't have any other questions. But I just wanted to end by saying we actually will have our last Teaching Cleveland Learning Lab on April 21st, and we will have a conversation with the Fund for Economic Future, in which we will talk about, again, actually ways to engage youth, but also the vision and the importance of what they found in the Two Tomorrows report. So, and how it can relate to what we're doing in the classroom. So we're very much looking forward to it. That's on April 21st. Again, it's a 5 to 6 o'clock Zoom meeting. And we hope to have many of you come back and listen to the conversation with the Fund for Economic Future. So again, a big thanks, Justin.
Thank you so much.
As I said at the top of the hour, Justin and I hit it off at the CLE Rising Summit, really around just engaging young people and being civically, active. And I appreciate the fact that here you are in your situation now, encouraging many of us to do the same thing. So thank you so much. We definitely appreciate your time, your insights, and your enthusiasm for, what is coming for the future of Cleveland.
Thank you for having me, Greg. Really appreciate being with you all.
Thanks, Justin. And thank you all for joining us. We'll see you on April 21st. Everybody have a great evening.